They say when a man begins to love, he doesn't confess it with words. He reveals it through tests, not the kind meant to trick or confuse, but the kind born from fear and longing. Before he gives his heart, he needs to know if it's safe in your hands. So he watches in silence, withdraws without warning, and challenges without reason, not to push you away, but to see if your love can stay when the illusion fades. Because for a man, the question is never, "Do you love me?" It's, "Can you still love me when I'm no longer hiding?" When a man begins to fall in love, he doesn't dive in head first, like the stories often claim. Something far deeper happens inside him, a quiet storm of uncertainty and yearning. His heart wants to open, but his mind hesitates. Love for him is not merely an emotion to be felt, it is a risk to be measured, an inner territory that demands safety before surrender. And so, without even realizing it, he begins to test the woman who has stirred this awakening within him. The test is not deliberate or manipulative. It is instinctive, almost primal. It rises from the deepest part of his psyche, the part that has been shaped by past wounds, disappointments, and the hidden fear of being misunderstood. He does not ask directly, "Can I trust you with my soul?" Instead, he watches quietly, observing the small, almost invisible things that reveal the answer. He tests emotional safety not through words but through moments. He might share something vulnerable, a story of his past, a failure, a dream that feels fragile. He watches her eyes, her silence, her reaction. Does she listen without judgment, or does she rush to fix him, to analyze, to control? In those subtle exchanges, he learns whether her presence feels like a home or a battlefield. When a man loves, what he longs for most is not admiration, but understanding. He seeks a woman who can hold space for his truth, not just his strength. Because love, to him, means revealing parts of himself that the world rarely sees. The softness behind the armor, the uncertainty behind the confidence. The way she receives that hidden side tells him everything he needs to know about how safe love might be. Sometimes his tests appear as distance. He might withdraw, become quieter, even moody. Not because his feelings are fading, but because he needs to see how she handles his absence. Will she panic and chase, assuming the worst? Or will she stay calm, allowing space for his inner tides to settle? His silence is not punishment. It is a question in disguise. Can you love me even when I'm not easy to read? Men are often taught to guard emotion, to remain composed, to lead with reason rather than vulnerability. But when love enters, it challenges all of that. It invites him to be unguarded. And that is terrifying. So before he lets go, he must be sure that his heart will not be used against him. He might even share parts of himself that seem contradictory. Moments of openness followed by withdrawal, warmth followed by quietness. To her, it might seem confusing, but to him, it is the process of finding emotional equilibrium. He wants to know if she can handle his complexity without taking it personally. He needs to see if she can love not just his best self, but also the parts that still tremble. The test is about whether her love feels conditional, based on his consistency, his attention, his performance, or whether it feels rooted in a deeper connection that transcends mood and circumstance. Emotional safety for a man means knowing that he can fall apart sometimes without losing her respect. It means he can admit he's scared or uncertain without being seen as weak. When he tests her, he's not searching for perfection. He's searching for a kind of emotional maturity that says, "You don't have to be strong all the time for me to love you." A man gives his loyalty not to the woman who dazzles him most, but to the one who gives him peace. And when he feels that peace, that quiet certainty that his heart is safe, his testing ends, and his love begins to flow freely, not out of fear, but out of trust. When a man begins to fall in love, one of the first things he unconsciously searches for is authenticity. Attraction may draw him near, but truth is what keeps him there. Deep inside, he wants to see who she really is when the world isn't watching, when she's not trying to impress, when her guard is down. The test of authenticity is not something he plans or speaks about. It emerges naturally as he begins to sense the pull between appearance and essence. He doesn't only listen to what she says, he studies how she lives, how she treats others, how she handles discomfort, and how she behaves when there's nothing to gain. He wants to know whether her kindness is consistent, whether her emotions are honest, whether her presence feels real or rehearsed. Love, for him, is not about perfection. It's about emotional truth. The woman who can be genuine in a world obsessed with appearances becomes a rare and sacred mirror to his own inner longing for truth. When he falls in love, a man is not just falling for beauty, charm, or intelligence. He is falling for the feeling of emotional transparency that only authenticity can bring. He might gently challenge her with questions or quiet observation, not to catch her off guard, but to sense the depth behind her words. He notices if she speaks with conviction or if her opinions change to please him. He sees whether she stands in her own values or bends them to fit his approval. To him, authenticity is a sign of emotional strength, and that strength draws him more deeply than any outward display of attraction ever could. A man who loves deeply does not seek someone to complete him. He seeks someone who is complete within herself, someone who does not wear masks to be loved. In his presence, he hopes she does not perform love but embodies it. He observes whether she can show her imperfections without shame, whether she can laugh at herself, admit when she's wrong, or speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. In these moments, he is silently asking, "Can I trust you to be real with me when things get difficult?" Because what destroys love for him is not conflict, it's pretense. When he senses that her emotions are sincere, even when they are raw or unpolished, he feels more drawn to her essence. But when he detects that her affection is filtered through manipulation or insecurity, his heart retreats. To love someone who is real means he can finally drop his own performance. And that, for a man, is freedom. He might test this authenticity by revealing something of himself that is not flattering, a mistake, a flaw, a fear, and watching how she reacts. Does she use it to feel superior, to control, or to criticize? Or does she receive it with understanding? The woman who can meet imperfection without judgment shows him that her love is grounded in truth. In a world where many seek validation through image, he hungers for someone whose presence feels honest, someone who values connection over control. When he feels that energy, he relaxes. He no longer feels the need to impress, to compete, or to hide his insecurities. Her authenticity becomes a permission for his own. A man may also test authenticity by observing how she behaves when no one is watching, how she treats people who can offer her nothing, how she speaks about others when they're not there, how she carries herself in simplicity. To him, those small unnoticed moments reveal more about her spirit than any grand gesture. When he sees that who she is privately aligns with who she is publicly, his heart recognizes something pure. He realizes that her love is not a performance to win him. It is a reflection of her own integrity. And that is the kind of truth that pulls him beyond desire into devotion, where love ceases to be a game and becomes something sacred, something real. When a man begins to fall in love, he often measures its truth not through intensity, but through time. He does not fully trust emotions that burn too quickly, for he knows that what rises fast can also fade fast. Instead, he tests love through patience and presence, observing whether the bond can survive stillness, distance, and silence. To him, these moments are not absences, but revelations. He steps back, not because his feelings have weakened, but because he wants to see what remains when constant communication fades. This quiet testing is not about manipulation. It is about discovering whether her affection depends on momentum or on meaning. When he retreats into silence, he is asking a silent question. Can your love stay steady when I am not easy to reach? It is not rejection, it is reflection, his way of seeing whether her connection is rooted in need or in understanding. There is a sacred rhythm in how a man unfolds emotionally. When he loves, he feels a surge of vulnerability that both excites and frightens him. The more he cares, the more he senses how deeply he could be hurt. So he pauses. He observes how she responds when things slow down, when he takes longer to reply, when his attention shifts inward for a while. If she reacts with panic, accusation, or emotional pressure, he feels unsafe. But if she remains calm, patient, and grounded, trusting the connection without demanding constant proof, something within him begins to relax. He starts to believe that her love is not fragile, that it is wide enough to hold his silence without breaking. In that patience, he feels seen not as a source of validation, but as a human being with an inner world that needs space to breathe. The test of patience and presence often unfolds through subtle cycles of closeness and distance. He might open up one day, speaking with deep emotion, then suddenly become quiet the next. To a woman, this can seem confusing or frustrating, but for him, it is a necessary rhythm. When he feels emotionally exposed, he instinctively needs to withdraw, to process what he feels privately before returning. He does not always have words for this process. It happens below the level of awareness. He is not trying to test her devotion through suffering, but rather to understand if she can hold steady during the ebb and flow of emotional tides. Her ability to stay peaceful through those phases tells him that she is not loving an image of him, but his real self, one that sometimes needs solitude to feel whole again. During these pauses, he also watches how she fills the silence. Does she wait with resentment, or does she continue to live with grace and self-respect? The woman who maintains her own energy, who doesn't crumble or chase when he turns inward, becomes even more magnetic in his eyes. He begins to sense that her love is not built on dependency, but on balance. Her quiet confidence tells him that she is emotionally mature enough to give space without feeling abandoned. That steadiness teaches him something profound about love, that it does not demand, it allows. It does not cling, it trusts. For a man, love becomes real when it proves itself beyond words and gestures, when it endures silence without fear, when it stays kind without constant reassurance. The woman who understands that his distance is not detachment, but reflection, earns his deepest loyalty. She becomes the calm in which his heart rests, the quiet certainty he didn't know he needed. In her patience, he discovers a rare truth, that real love does not rush. It unfolds breath by breath until time itself becomes the proof that it was always meant to be. When a man falls in love, one of the deepest inner conflicts he experiences is between his heart and his ego. Love demands surrender, while the ego demands control. This conflict gives rise to what can be called the test of power. It is not a conscious or manipulative test, but rather a quiet struggle within him to see how power and vulnerability can coexist in the same space. When he begins to care deeply for a woman, he is faced with a paradox. He wants to open up and depend on her emotionally, yet he fears losing his sense of control or identity in doing so. So he observes how she responds when he asserts himself, when he disagrees, or when he momentarily pulls away to reclaim his inner balance. Her response to his autonomy becomes a silent mirror that reflects whether the relationship is built on domination or mutual respect. For a man, love is both a refuge and a risk. He knows that to truly love, he must give up the illusion of control, and that terrifies him more than rejection itself. He might test this by challenging her opinions, asserting independence, or resisting emotional merging. He wants to know, can she allow him to be himself without trying to change him? If she can hold her ground while also respecting his space, he begins to trust her presence more deeply. But if she reacts with control, demands, or emotional manipulation, he feels his freedom slipping away. A man's greatest fear in love is not being unloved, it is being subdued, losing the sense of who he is in the process of being close. He wants love to expand him, not confine him. Fine. When he tests the balance of power, he is not seeking dominance, he is seeking equilibrium. He may observe how she handles disagreement. Does she meet conflict with understanding or with the need to win? When she stays composed and doesn't use emotion as a weapon, he feels seen rather than threatened. A woman who respects his individuality without withdrawing her affection teaches him that love can exist alongside independence. That realization is transformative for him. He begins to see that being loved does not mean being controlled, and loving her does not mean losing himself. This is the quiet reassurance he searches for beneath every small argument or silent pause. Sometimes his test takes the form of emotional withdrawal. He may step back after a moment of closeness, not to create distance, but to see whether she respects the boundaries of his inner world. If she gives him space without resentment, he senses that she values harmony over possession. Her calmness during his retreat speaks louder than any promise. It tells him that she is not threatened by his strength, nor afraid of her own, and in that awareness, something in him begins to soften. The man who once needed control starts to realize that love does not take his power away. It transforms it into something purer, something that no longer feeds on dominance but on mutual reverence. The test of power is ultimately a reflection of how a man measures the emotional maturity of the bond. He needs to know that the woman he loves can handle his intensity without trying to outshine it, that she can meet his strength with her own grace rather than competition. When she can hold her boundaries without creating walls, when she can stay connected without needing control, he feels safe to surrender to love. The moment he sees that she does not want to conquer him but to understand him, his defenses begin to fade. For the first time, power no longer feels like a battle. It feels like balance, where two souls stand equal, neither above nor beneath, both free and yet deeply bound by choice rather than fear. When a man begins to love deeply, he is drawn into emotional depths he rarely explores. Love stirs something ancient within him, a mixture of longing, fear, and vulnerability that he cannot easily explain. The moment he feels emotionally exposed, his instinct is to test the strength of the bond, not through words of reassurance, but through the tension of emotional depth. This test is not cruel, it is unconscious. He wants to know whether the woman who has captured his heart can navigate not just his light, but also his shadow. Love, for him, is not proven in moments of harmony, but in how two hearts survive dissonance. When he provokes subtle conflict, withdraws emotionally, or shows his contradictions, he is not trying to create distance, but to observe whether the connection has enough depth to survive emotional turbulence. At the surface, this behavior can seem confusing. One moment he might be tender, the next distant. He might start a conversation that touches on something uncomfortable or question the stability of the relationship without clear reason. But beneath that, he is seeking emotional truth. He wants to see if she can handle the reality of his inner world, the parts that are conflicted, uncertain, and imperfect. Many men carry emotional wounds they've never fully expressed, and when love draws near, those wounds rise to the surface. The closer he feels to her, the more he senses the risk of being seen too deeply. So he tests the emotional container of their bond. Can she remain steady when he becomes unpredictable? Can she stay loving when his emotions are messy, not measured? In these moments, he may express frustration, question his feelings, or create distance after vulnerability. To her, it might feel like rejection, but in truth, it's an emotional experiment. He's not testing her love through cruelty, but through authenticity. He wants to know if she will still be there when his mask slips. For him, emotional depth is not about constant positivity. It's about truth. He needs to feel that she can hold space for him, even when he's not strong, charming, or composed. He needs to see whether she listens when he speaks from pain rather than pride. The woman who can meet that version of him with calm understanding becomes unforgettable to him because she has touched a place few ever reach, the part of him that yearns to be loved beyond performance. A man who tests emotional depth may also observe how she responds to his emotional storms. Does she react with defensiveness or compassion? Does she try to fix him, or does she allow him to express what he feels without judgment? The woman who remains present even when things are uncomfortable teaches him that love can be a safe space for truth. Her patience allows him to trust that he can bring all of himself into the relationship, not just the parts that look strong. He realizes that love doesn't require perfection, only presence. And when she stays grounded during his moments of confusion, it speaks to him more deeply than any declaration of love could. Her steadiness shows him that she is not afraid of his emotions, and that calms something primal inside him. Through these emotional tests, what he is really searching for is connection that transcends appearances, a love that can breathe underwater. When he feels that the bond can endure tension without breaking, he begins to soften. His defenses, which once shielded his vulnerability, start to dissolve. He learns that love does not demand constant peace, but the courage to return to it after the storm. A man's heart opens not when everything feels perfect, but when he realizes that even in imperfection, he is still accepted. That is the moment he stops testing, for he has found what he was unconsciously searching for, a love that can hold the full spectrum of who he is. When a man falls deeply in love, the final and most profound test he gives, often without realizing it, is the test of unconditional acceptance. Beneath his confidence, independence, and control lies a hidden fear that he is not entirely lovable as he is. This fear is not born from arrogance, but from experience, from years of being taught that love must be earned through achievement, strength, or perfection. When he begins to love a woman deeply, he longs for a connection that allows him to exist without armor. Yet he hesitates because true love exposes the most fragile truth of all, that even his flaws, his moods, and his insecurities might be seen. So before he fully opens, he watches quietly, almost spiritually, to see if her love reaches beyond his best moments. The test of unconditional acceptance is not about whether she tolerates him, but whether she can see all of him and still choose to stay. He begins to reveal himself in layers. At first, he shows the charming, composed version of himself, the man the world knows and respects. But over time, as love deepens, he begins to expose the parts he usually hides. He may show her his exhaustion, his doubts, his temper, or the shadows of his past. These are not random confessions, they are quiet offerings. Each time he opens a little more, he observes how she responds. If she reacts with judgment, criticism, or withdrawal, he retreats back into silence. But if she listens, not to correct or change him, but to understand, he feels something rare: peace. It is in that peace that his heart begins to trust her completely. For him, being accepted in his imperfection is far more intimate than being desired in his perfection. Sometimes his tests take subtler forms. He might express an unpopular opinion, fail at something important, or reveal a side of himself that isn't admirable. It is in those moments he feels most exposed, and it is then that her reaction matters most. Does she still look at him with warmth, or does her affection fade? The woman who can love him without needing him to always be strong teaches him that love is not a transaction, it is a sanctuary. Her acceptance gives him permission to stop performing, to be honest about what he feels, even when it's messy or uncertain. In that space, his soul relaxes. He no longer has to prove himself to be worthy of her. He simply has to be. And that is what allows his love to deepen beyond measure. This test also reveals how she views love itself. If she sees love as something conditional, dependent on success, control, or consistency, he senses it quickly. He feels when affection is tied to convenience. But if her love remains steady through his confusion, through his quiet days and restless nights, he realizes she loves not his image but his essence. This realization changes everything for him. The man who once held back begins to give freely. The walls he built to protect his heart begin to fall, not because she demanded it, but because she showed him it was safe to do so. In her acceptance, he learns that love does not mean being flawless. It means being seen fully and still being chosen. For a man, unconditional acceptance is the point where love becomes transformative. It turns fear into faith, resistance into surrender. When he feels loved for who he truly is, not who he tries to be, his defenses dissolve. He no longer needs to test her loyalty or measure her patience because her presence has already answered every question. In her eyes, he sees a reflection of his humanity, unedited and unjudged. That reflection awakens a kind of devotion that words cannot contain. He stops searching, stops proving, stops running. For the first time, love is not something he needs to earn. It is something he finally allows himself to receive. In the end, when a man falls in love, his tests are not games of manipulation but silent cries of the soul. Each one, whether through distance, silence, conflict, or contradiction, is his way of asking, "Can I be loved not for what I show, but for who I truly am?" His heart seeks refuge in truth, safety in patience, strength in balance, depth in understanding, and peace in acceptance. Behind every hesitation lies the longing to trust again, to surrender without fear of being broken. A woman who passes these unspoken tests does not win him through strategy, but through presence. She becomes the mirror in which he finds his truest self, the man he becomes when he feels seen, not judged, understood, not fixed, accepted, not controlled. And when he finds that kind of love, his testing ends, for he has found what every man quietly yearns for, a love that feels like home, not a battlefield, where both can finally rest in the safety of each other's truth.